In this meeting we're going to be remembering a few people who aren't with us, who are dead. George Fursoff, who helped me create the whole thing in the beginning, back in 1998, who was a pagan priest and Cambridge graduate. He had an MA in sociology, a very clever man who lived through the 60s and wrote a book called The Spring of Youth about the 60s, might remember. And he was at the Battle of the Beanfield environs when it all happened and felt passionately something had gone wrong. So that's how this thing came into being, really. And then also we remember today Brian Vision-Dance, who was our media officer for a while, and very active, and quite a character, as many of you know. And then there are other people like Nora Morris, who was a descendant of John Aubrey, who was the first sort of antiquarian to identify Stonehenge with the Druids, in fact. And also Tim Abbott of Wiltshire, who died. So there have been a number of people, and we'll remember all their contributions. So let's start with just a minute's silence, please, as we focus on the work for peace. Great Spirit, God and Goddess, we ask for your blessings and guidance on this meeting. May we honour the dead, the ancestors, and those yet to come, and pass on the torch of wisdom, age unto age. Stonehenge may be a place of peace, happiness, and insight for us all. So may it be. Okay, so just to welcome you again. Now, in front of you there should be an agenda. If you can not see one, there should be another printed. If you can share it with your neighbour if you don't have one. Let me just remind you that those of you that haven't been to one of these meetings before, the reason the TRC came into being was to provide a forum for dialogue and communication between different people who have different agendas and visions for Stonehenge. And hopefully that's going to be addressed during the meeting as we share in turn, okay? Just to remind you a few ground rules, like we may all have strong opinions and views, and we may feel bitterly about this, that, or the other position. We're here to share those opinions, but in a polite and respectful way. So let's listen to each other, and let's not call each other names, jump up and down, shout at each other, and so on. Let's try and, keep certain basic principles of open discourse. And we're here as much as possible to share the truth, though. And truth sometimes is difficult, because we all have different positions on that. So try and speak from your highest self. Okay. Now, firstly, I'm going to pass this talking stick round, and this is a chance to introduce yourself. A couple of minutes, who you are, why you're here, summary of your involvement in the Stonehenge issue, if you can be brief. Then we'll go round, and then we'll start the meeting proper. Okay. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Dr Thomas Daffern. I've met many people in this room, not everyone. I'm a philosopher and historian. I got interested in peacemaking between religions back in the 90s. I was working at the University of London as a research scholar and teacher on interfaith peacemaking. I was researching for a PhD at the time, and I set up a mediation service that deals with interfaith dispute resolution after attending a conference at the Vatican with the former Pope and 900 religious leaders from all over the planet. And I thought, why aren't these religions making peace among themselves? They're causing so much trouble in the world. You know, the Balkans were kicking off, the Middle East. And so I created a multi-faith mediation service. And one of the first cases that came to us was when George Fursoff came and sought me out in the Cotswolds and said, we have a religious issue about access to Stonehenge. I represent the pagan and Druid community, and we're not being allowed to access it. And that was how I got involved with this whole work. Okay. And I'm a poet, a bard, a druid, peacemaker, and lover of life. And I just want to see Stonehenge a place of magic and mystery. And I want our country as a whole to reclaim its own spirituality, and not simply become a sort of corporate, tourist centre. Okay. So anyway, that's my introduction. And just to say, I've also written up the history of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. For this meeting, I brought 10 copies of this book along, which give you the minutes, the details, the context of all our formal meetings. This is technically, I think, the 37th meeting of the TRC. And the history of it is all in this book here. Okay. So, welcome, and thanks for coming. Sir. Yeah.
Good day. My name is Christian Lange. I'm the Sector Inspector for Amesbury and so I look after the policing for the area. I'll start off telling you a little bit about myself. So I joined the police when I was 25. Before that, I did a fair bit of travelling around, so with a guitar on my back and busking my way around the world. Went to India for several months and Australia and all that kind of stuff. So in a similar way, I feel I find interfaith religion or the variety of religions across the world very interesting. But anyway, that's so I'm quite interested in what's going to be discussed here anyway. In the policing world, I started off up in Metropolitan Police, did 7 years there, and then transferred to Wiltshire, 98 or 99 around then. So most of the troubles had passed by the time I came over here. For the last 3 years, I've been the sector commander here, so I tend to look after the policing element of the open access. So I'm what's known as ground commander for all the operations except for the summer solstice. The summer solstice is a much bigger one, and the summer solstice I'm the briefing officer. So I set the scene for the officers when they come for a briefing, so that they know. And some of the bits I talk about is around respecting other people's religions, other people's ways of life, and so on. So those are some of the things that we talk about. So I'm more than happy to speak about what the open access is like and how we police it, how I think we should approach the policing of it. It's becoming increasingly difficult because of increasing numbers of people coming along, particularly for the winter solstice. Is a real challenge. Happy to talk about how we try and manage some of those challenges to keep everybody safe, which is my main aim, and so on. So that's
great. Well, we'll talk about access on the agenda. Yeah. Pass it round. Thank you.
My name's Mickey. Long time Stonehenge up in the festival. Involved since it got closed down in the campaign for opening it up again. Currently, I'm promoting the Stonehenge proposal for extending access, and my particular angle or view that I'm dealing with is not necessarily the spiritual side. I'm dealing with the fact that it's the public that has lost access, even though some of those members of the public may be Druids or pagans or spiritual in another nature. I'm dealing with the public's access on it and the equity of access between all people, whether they have a spiritual bent or religious bent or not.
Okay, welcome, Mickey. Thank you.
Many know me by my Druid name. My real name is Lois Lloyd. I keep it separate because we have another life which involves jazz and health and social care scrutiny, so I spend a lot of time on very high boards of commissioners including Devon and Cornwall Police. That is my other life. My Druid life is quite private now. I tend to be solitary again. I'm in the West Country. The nearest place to me is Dartmoor. My keen interest, having grown up in this area and being able to cycle from Shrivenham to the Stones and just walk in and walk out, it may intrigue you to know my stepfather was in charge of heavy drop to Para, and he equally shares our fury that we can't get in and out. And he is so right-wing, he makes Genghis Khan look quite reasonable, doesn't it? So where you will get support, you will be quite surprised where it is. Anybody who comes down to conferences in Plymouth all want to stop, all are getting most annoyed. I think we could probably get more support for an equitable access to Stonehenge from people today stuck on the road as we drove up from Plymouth. Horrendous state. Anyway, I am here. I offer any skills I have. I have a social policy administration degree. I have a legal background, which I stopped doing because I got fed up having to deal with things that went wrong. I'm trying to prevent. But I think people have to work with each other, as Thomas said, and use the things that get thrown at us constructively and use the knowledge that we've got to counteract it wisely.
Thank you.
David Baker, supporter of Lois and Rasta, and interested observer, and supporter of the principle that access to Stonehenge should be managed better than it is.
Okay. Welcome, David.
I've got something.
I'm Mick Godfrey. I'm a local resident and a Druid, and to be honest with you, I deal with tourists on almost daily basis. The reactions after they visit, before they visit the Stones, they're all excited and looking forward to it, and the disgust and the reaction they get when they come back from the Stones that I deal with almost on a daily basis makes me think that it's been overexploited, and that's from the business side of things. I get to first-hand reactions from tourists day in, day out. On a spiritual side, on a spiritual point, from a spiritual angle, I believe that I should be allowed access to my premier temple in this country anytime Spirit calls me, not being restricted to walking around a road 50 yards from the Stones, having to walk 2 miles, 1.5 miles to gain access to it, or pre-book, or pay for access. It should be returned to the conditions of the deed of gift that it was given to the nation under. And that's where I stand. I've been banging my head against the wall. I've been actively protesting when the exclusion zone was up. I got arrested untold times, and I found that screaming and shouting about it don't get you anywhere, it just gets you locked up. And I feel that through discussion we can get further. And if nothing else, I do believe, having read the deed of gift, Stonehenge, that we do have a legal angle that we can challenge these people at. We can challenge them from a legal perspective in the courts. But before we go through the expensive court cases, we could get quite a long way by open discussion.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Mick. Welcome.
Hello everybody, you all know me, I'm Robin. You know my opinion that Stonehenge should be returned to a free and open space 24/7 for anybody of any faith, and that it is a disgrace, frankly. This is the collection of all the posts that you'll find on Free Stonehenge page. They're all put together as an argument. How to win the argument is how I see it. This was the argument I presented to the Wiltshire Council legal team, and after presenting this argument, they told me if I presented it in this manner we would win in court, because fundamentally it's our religious freedoms that are being oppressed. We aren't acknowledged in this country, we're marginalised, And when David Cameron comes on the telly and says this is a Christian country, we want to just shout at the telly, no, you're not, mate. You're outnumbered massively. And it's time we stood up and did something. And if you want to know the argument, it's in here. There's some coffees over there if you want them there. $5.99. Thank you very much.
Okay, well,
I'm Rollo, Stonehenge Archdruid. Well, everyone's heard, of course, of the Battle of the Beanfield in 1985, or Massacre of the Beanfield, or whatever, whichever way you want to look at it. But something else which is equally important in this story, I think, is what happened 3 years later, not what happened up at Cheltenham with people turning up in motorised form for a festival, which is one particular thing of very great importance, what happened at that time. But 3 years later, 1988, everybody came on foot. They left the vehicles behind and they came literally to watch the sunrise and to get into Stonehenge, which is a perfectly reasonable, legal, lawful thing to want to do. And there's no disrespect to Christianity, because he will know this is the truth of what happened. But when they were corralled onto the A344, police advanced from both ends, and there was another riot. It was really, very, very nasty, horrible thing to see. So what we, as Gaston Order of Druids, we were at the time already decided to do was to hold religious ceremonies by the side of the road by the Heelstone 4 times a year to mark the times of solstice and equinoxes and the right of ordinary people, pilgrims, festival people, ordinary people, local people, anybody else who's at all interested, just to come to a little service and observance of a particular seasonal festival. So we did this for lots of years, and then in 1995, Heritage, which up until that point had not been willing to discuss matters at all with us or with anybody, we call Druid or Traveller or Pagan or whatever it was, or member of the public, you still weren't privy to any discussions with them. And then in 1995, we managed to get, just during the time of Clues Everard, from degree to start holding round-table meetings once a month to start to sort out the business. And during the course of that time from then on, the first thing we did was push to have these 4 days, the summer and winter solstice, spring and autumn equinox, recognised as entry access points, as had been since the time immemorial, if you like. But at the same time, we were also trying to get Heritage to recognise, which they eventually did, that these rites have existed since very, very early times, since 1189, in fact, when King Richard I came to the throne. Because there are Eisteddfod gatherings, because we were concerned, how do we protect any gatherings we do have? We obviously aren't able to protect them as free festivals, we also aren't able to protect them as right to party, but we can protect them as religious and cultural gatherings. So all that's required for Eisteddfod basically is Druids to open and close it, and it's up to anybody else to get on music or theatre or any dance or any particular thing they would like to do, busking, anything else during the entire night. That constitutes a legal festival. And so this is what we're still pressing on with. Here we are, finally got access for everybody again in 2000. Everything was going on nicely, but of course the movement is growing again, and people are beginning to see, since the new visitor centre, that there's a compression on the tourist aspect, which is making those 4 days like the only islands we'll ever have when, as Robbie just said, the movement is growing very large. So I'll stop talking now and pass on.
thank you, Robert. Welcome. Yeah.
My name is Adam David. I was present at 7 consecutive years People's Free Festival at Stonehenge, the last 7 years that it was held there. And it's a great privilege to get to know some of the so-called unorganisers. But what I really appreciated was the openness of how things were going there, and to see how up until the end and everything closed, that like the barbed wire was removed from the stones I believe it was 2 consecutive years. Anyway, the last one that was with no barbed wire, and it was wonderful to be in the procession that led into the stones. Okay, there's fences around the fields, but it was good to have open access that was not, there was no need for any documentation or paperwork, any payment of a toll or anything like that. It was just open for all in that space. And that was a really great experience. Yeah, what I was less happy to see was the commercialisation of the festival towards the end. It was disastrous, and yeah, I enjoyed time around the acoustic stage in 1984, and that was a really good time. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name's Steph Mills. I've just come to report from Ireland and from the north coast, which has many sites, and we've got a different kind of thing going on there because if you're pagan, you're not well thought of at all, because it's a very, very kind of boxy type situation. Like if you're not Protestant or Catholic, if you that's one way of looking at it. But if you're pagan, you're certainly, But the only thing that I can kind of come up with on this discussion, because I'm really a visitor, is that I live in an area where there are lots of sites and lots of earthworks, which not very many tourists come to, which is a blessing. And I can roam there as I will. And there's actually a line that goes through. There's a standing stone behind where I live, a stone circle, and then my friend lives in the Murderhole Road, the funny name, but he is Druid. And it's different. So there's kind of like two levels. There's a level where you can roam and you can be who you are and engage with spirit on the land, but if you're too public about it, you will be hammered. And I came to Stonehenge quite a few years ago, and I just it wasn't just Stonehenge I came to Amesbury and all around the area, and it was like, giving me a fuller picture of our history and everything, and the feeling. It's more the feeling that I can talk about, because that's where I come from. The feeling then was amazing, and the strength and power and all of the feel of the ancestors there was very good. 2 years ago I went back. I cried when I got to Stonehenge, because it was just felt tainted. That's the only way that I can put it. And the whole layout, the visitor centre, the whole shebang of going through the road, and just the whole feeling. I felt really sorry. I felt really sorry for Stonehenge and for everything that it meant.
Okay.
That's all that I
Thank
can
you.
say.
Well, we're going to be discussing that shortly, yeah. Hello.
Hi, my name is Mardy Lee. I'm an ex-traveller, and I go to Stonehenge, the solstice and the equinox. I started with a group of friends, a group called Open Access to Stonehenge, because basically we believe that since the stopping of the festival, this has done many things, we're expected to go and basically stand all night in all sorts of weathers and everything without even being able to provide for ourselves and etc., which we used to be able to do. And then we're told that why should they provide it for us? Well, as far as I'm concerned, they stopped people being able to provide it. They've got rules and restrictions that seem to get more restrictive every year. Stonehenge, for me, is about celebration of life, it is celebration of the seasons. And it should be not just for us pagans or anything, it should be for everybody. And I think as a little group of pagans and people that go to Stonehenge before, we've been sidelined because people just think we're groggy, crazy, druidy, weird people. We need to go out beyond us, and we've done quite well so far.
Welcome, Marty. Thank you.
I'm George. I'm not a Druid, but someone my best friend. I went to Stonehenge when I was a boy. My parents took me there, a Hampshire lad. And then '76, I got to the festival, took LSD, went in the middle of Stonehenge, and wow, it all makes sense. And all the festivals after that. And I got a bus, bit it broke down, and got towed to Glastonbury. I still went to Stonehenge. Got a criminal record for walking to Glastonbury police station with cannabis in my pocket. It was a protest about the stupid laws when I was a young Liberal. Then '85, I finally got my bus, nearly got there, but then they smashed the windows. And got arrested for unlawful damage, and in the end it all got dropped to criminal damage to grass by driving over it, damaging crops. But in one of the court cases, I said, look, he's saying the grass was that long, it was that long, the farmer, so all that ended. Then '86 was Sabbath, and then we started the Stonehenge campaign, Toriano Avenue, John Retty and people. We started after the Beanfield '86, and we spent years doing newsletters and started going 4 times a year and camping outside under a bit of plastic. And then other people turned up. When did Arthur turn up? About 5 years later, and then people started doing the paperwork and the appeals and all of that, which I didn't do much of. You were saying about there's something about Stonehenge, all the publicity, and it gets too much publicity. But partly that's useful in that all the other sites like Amesbury and the Rollright Stones don't get mentioned. So any nutter there is at solstice is going to turn up at Stonehenge.
Nutter there is, Joyce George, yeah?
Well, sort of...
you speaking, yeah?
Yeah, it's a toy stick. So in a way we're giving colour to them, and by just advertising Stonehenge all the time, hopefully there's not going to do the same thing. And all the other stone circles. Then what happened? Then I was at Wandsworth Eco Village in a bus where a nutty woman called me a paedophile. You mentioned Tim Abbott, didn't you? Who,
I did, yeah.
He did something with a child and eventually admitted it and committed suicide, which was the right thing to do. But in my case, a few years later, she went to the police who believed her, and then they arrested me, and it got laid on file at a court case I wasn't told about, and I'm not allowed to defend myself. And they keep bringing, whenever I get anywhere, the policeman goes around the back and says, oh, by the way, George is a paedophile. We got the attack files on him, prosecution.
And it's never come to court?
No, I'm not allowed to go to court. I'm not allowed to give them the defence papers. I went to the police a few months ago in Yeovil because they stopped me seeing my girlfriend's kids, and the woman there said, oh, you've fallen between the gaps, and we refused to reopen the investigation. No, see, still, I got a video of her in Glastonbury High Street a few months ago screaming at someone calling them paedophiles, but...
That sounds like a horrendous case.
So I can't do anything publicly. If I jump up and do something, a book, I'm going to get them going round the back, and or the police also say, oh, by all the social, don't tell anyone we've told you this. And it's just,
sounds like you need a good lawyer, George. I'm sure
they're expensive, yeah, that's what I say, £80 an hour.
The police said to me you're like a paedophile. The police said to me
they go around, yeah, and
they did an interview about a different matter, and they mentioned you quite a lot.
Because that's what the files say, and I'm not allowed to put the...
Can we just move on?
Anyway, oh, the joke, this vicar, there was a vicar, right? You said about different religions. This vicar was making breakfast, and he got the toast out of the toaster. Went, wow, there's a picture of Jesus in my toast. He ran out in the street, the first person he met, look, Jesus in my toast. The bloke, well, actually I'm a Muslim. Went, oh. And he looked at the toast and went, I can't believe it's not Buddha.
Thank you. Superb joke, right? Just introducing ourselves at this point. For those that have come in late, we'll pass you back the talking stick. If we don't interrupt each other at this point, that's really helpful. Yeah, thanks.
My name's Anne Milden. Basically, I'm born in Somerset, but a family in Kent. I spent the whole of my childhood basically driving backwards and forwards up the A303 before the M25, and we would stop off and we would walk around Stonehenge. And that I don't. I've got to know Robin through the joys of Facebook, and obviously was involved in this. But when I was a child, I would go out of the car, we walk around Stonehenge. I can get out of the car, I can walk around the stones at Amesbury. I went to Stanton Drew last weekend. I dodged the cow patch. You put £1 in the tub if you want to, and I really don't see why English heritage have turned this into the 3-ring circus they have. And that we basically, it should just be how it should be. It is, they are. I'm not from any religion. I'm not pagan. I'm not anything. But those stones.
From the public.
Yes, I'm just a upstanding member of the public. Not hippie, drug-taking, traveller, whatever. And I still believe I should be able to walk onto those stones any day I wish.
Right. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Daryl Lambert. I'm just a normal person from Bournemouth. What I believe was the guy that owned the place gave it to the nation, not English heritage. So the nation should decide, and English heritage should hand it over to the Druidic order to run it as they like, as it's their temple.
Well, that's a good
Our
idea.
temple.
Keep that one on the table. Thank you. Hello.
Hi, I'm Sheila Goff. I live near Avebury, and I think there's a massive contrast between what happens in Avebury and what happens at Stonehenge. And I think, especially around this edge of the table, I was listening to what all of you were saying, not that I'm saying everybody else didn't say something that resonated with me, but I was thinking about the commercialism side of it. And I didn't feel very spiritual the last time I went to Stonehenge, and that made me very sad.
Yeah.
Something's wrong, you know, and that's it. And I'm wearing my dark glasses because I've just had an eye operation, so I'm not pretending to be a film star. The lights get to me. So I'm very interested to see if we could thrash something out to make it what it's meant to be.
Right, welcome.
Hello, I'm Jane Singleton. I moved here from Essex in 1981, and we always used to go to the stones when we passed them by, and it was always wonderful. It's only in the last sort of 20 years probably I've come round to acknowledging what the stones mean. And I'm not an official Druid, but I have great, not sympathies, but I can understand exactly where you're coming from. And I think if you have a faith, it doesn't matter where you come from, you have a faith and you share it. And I'm really saddened what's happened to Stonehenge, and how do we get beyond this? So that is what this is about.
Can I just ask you to pass the talk stick to the back row, so to speak? If you'd just like to introduce yourself very briefly and say what brought you here.
Well, my wife's just ducked out to get the food, and she's the reason that I'm here. My name's Ian Casson. I was born up the road in Woking, but I've never actually lived anywhere near the place. I've always wanted to go to Stonehenge, but my parents made a decision to move to Australia. So I've been living there for 20 years. This is my first trip to Stonehenge, and I've came late, so I'm sorry. We had other things to do this morning. We met Thomas the other day, and he invited us to come and join. My wife's Native American. She was performing a ceremony at the Stones yesterday.
We saw her, we were there, we watched you do that.
Yeah.
It was beautiful, we thought that was fabulous.
And that was her. This is her second trip to Stonehenge. She's seen a massive difference. She told me what to expect before I came, and with the new centre opening, I mean, it's fantastic from a commercial point of view. From you know, compared to other facilities that I've seen around the world in all the different countries I've travelled to, as a commercial enterprise, it looks great. As a spiritual presence, I felt nothing yesterday, and I was anticipating feeling a great deal. So I was a bit sad that it didn't live up to my expectations. I'm sure my wife would like to say something along those lines as well. But I'll pass the stick to the other gentleman for now while she organises herself. Oh, yeah. It's just to say, introduce yourself.
A little bit about
how you came here. I just did my bit.
Hi, I'm Monica. I am from the United States, and I'm Native American, as well as 5 other different ethnicities. And we came to Stonehenge. I did my first Vision Quest here at Stonehenge 2 years ago. I don't know if you guys know what a Vision Quest is, but then I came back yesterday to do another one. So that's what I'm doing here. And I met Thomas, and he invited us to the meeting.
Thank you. Watched you smudging?
Yes,
yesterday?
yes. I was smudging.
Just to say your name, sir.
Willie X. Willie X, my name, William X, yes.
Okay. Do you want to share a bit about your involvement?
Not really, no.
And your name is?
My name's Dan. I lived in the Druid for about a year and a half until recently. I just got back from Wales.
Right, welcome.
I can tell you a few stories with you, but lots of them.
My name's I attended Stonehenge festivals in the early 80s, and I've been to the organised ones 2001 and the odd 2000, and I met Robin and Mick and got to know them, and been sitting down listening to all the conversations, what have been going on, sort of sides and with everything. It saddens me that no solution has been found, and all the Druids are not getting on together, and I think everybody should have equal access to Stonehenge. and log on visitors.
First we get that statement.
I forgot to put these out there. It's 4 tables and 4 bits, so
Right.
I'll dive in here while you... Oh, sorry, while you...
Okay, so...
Thomas, can I just share something? Sure. On the way here, given that this has gone from recent history towards the new visitor centre, I mean, as I came up 303 from Wales today, there's extraordinary build-up, gridlock traffic, which I think is apparently common at the moment. I don't know why that has suddenly started to happen. But as I came past the stone, I was actually quite worried because I mean, one is used to see, if you've been a lot to do with Stonehenge, the stones in different lights, and particularly in grey weather or whatever. They're marvellous, they shimmer and they're tall and all the rest of it. I looked across the field in the heat today, and they looked like tiny little twisted up things. What we were talking about oversubscribed.
They do seem to change their look.
They change their look, yes, but this thing about oversubscription tends to...
Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple of apologies to read out before we sort of proceed with the agenda.
You did the introduction first?
I think you missed the introduction, sadly. We've already done the kind of introduction. Now, just a few people who aren't here and who would have liked to have been, and have sent in a little message, so to say. The first one I want to share is Roy Gillett, who has been involved in the Roundtable for many years. And for those of you that go to the open access at the summer solstices, he's often helping with the Peace Stewards, which is one of the practical spin-offs of the early work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, Roy is an astrologer, and he's the president of the Astrological Association. I've also got another astrologer who's also sent in apologies to do the chart of the Battle of the Beanfield, and so we're working on that. I message he wanted to be read out. As a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge participant from near its beginning and chair of its meetings in Amesbury in London, when Thomas couldn't attend for a while, I'm sorry that as a long-standing speaking engagement in London means I can't be with you today. After the first years of access, and especially when George and then Brian passed on, the TRC has not met recently. Therefore, roundtable meetings, which several people around this table attend. While these are intended to focus on arranging access, broader issues are often discussed. Few people would say that this has achieved all we would have wished, but it has established a good working relationship of respect and cooperation with the authorities and enabled quarterly access to be enjoyed by tens of thousands of people for over 14 years. The reorganisation of seeing access arrangements in a state of flux through 2013 to 2015. During this time, it is important to work closely with the decision makers and watch issues of access very carefully. Some decisions cannot be made while the older visitor centre is a building site and then settling down after. However, the principle of open access to anyone at all times is one to be guarded and worked for. However, tourists may wish to use the new visitor centre, exhibition and land train, but this should not prevent spiritual pilgrims making their own way across an open landscape. King Arthur Pendragon has and continues to work hard to keep the byways open, so this can be by road as well as on foot. Many other developments for pilgrims have been raised over the years. Some have come to and been argued for at the round table. Those that have succeeded have done so because people were willing to attend meetings regularly, make the contacts outside the meetings, and so take on board and carry through the practicalities to fruition. Having a dream and expecting others to make it happen leads nowhere except a bad feeling all round. So basically he's saying, you know, have a great meeting. And if you want to come to this summer solstice, please volunteer as a peace steward. One Love, Roy Gillett, which is a very sweet letter, I think. I've also got a contribution from Arthur Pendragon, who's likewise given his
say
apologies.
something about Roy Gillett for those that are not familiar with the
yeah,
name.
go for it.
If nothing else, this guy should be commended for attending virtually every single operational planning committee meeting which takes place before a round table meeting. That's with all the officials from the police, from Wiltshire Council, from English Heritage, from the byways, from the fire and ambulance and everything else, all the stewards and things for the summer solstice. So, I mean, you know, most of us find the round table meeting quite enough for one day, just by itself.
Right.
Is actually reporting on everything that's happened there over many, many years now. And, you know, I don't know who else we would find. Anyway, so that's just my word for Roy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No, Roy's a great bloke, and you know, is here in spirit. Okay, a message from an interesting exchange I'm going to share from Arthur Pendragon, who many of you will know, a controversial figure, an Aries, to mention astrology. And it's an exchange which I'll share with the meeting. I've been a member, Arthur always used to come to earlier meetings. I've been a member and supporter of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge since its conception, and indeed attended and spoke at the first meetings. It is now, however, in danger of becoming little more than a talking shop, where very little attention is paid to remedy and the way forward, and too much attention to the glory days. How it was viewed through rose-tinted glasses and how certain people like to see it again. This is 2014. And there is not the same appetite there was in the 70s and 80s, nor is there the same confrontation we saw in the 90s. I believe it is time to move on and to face the challenges of our time. The removal and display of the ancestors. The threat of the all-powerful corporate Stonehenge. The threatened closure of the byways in and around Stonehenge. And the many other issues that demand urgent attention and resolution. To that end, I will continue to fight for a better and more harmonious Stonehenge. Achieving such a goal, not in a detached philosophical way, but in a way that leads to real and tangible results. So I'm going to read my response to Dear Arthur. Okay, hello, we are different, Arthur, and have different ways of operating. I'm a scholar, teacher, historian, and philosopher of peace, and have been for many years, and it was this that led me to Druidry, and not activism per se. So my word is based. But that does not make it any less real or effective. I actually think that if you took a bit of time to think things through in detail and do some philosophy, then your own campaigns would be more effective. You remind me of a bull charging hither and thither across the fields. You might occasionally benefit from listening to advice on strategy from other wisdom workers and even, God forbid, philosophers. But so be it, it is all good. We all carry on in our own ways, and I wish you luck with yours. Then Arthur's reply, I agree with everything you say, but sometimes it's action that's needed. And because I'm a full-time Druid, I'm able to put a lot more work into it and make things happen, reaching the other parts Druids cannot reach through the mainstream media. Blessings. So anyway, there we are. I think that's a sort of you know, a blessing of sorts, mixed blessing from Arthur. And then finally, a message from Philip Shallcrass of the British Druid Order, who's been active in many sort of Druid circles for many years, was also invited. And I asked him particularly about the history between the Round Table and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I was trying to clear up the history of, you know, which was started when and so on, because the Round Table has a different remit. Obviously it's narrower, focused on the access points, as Rollo said. We're going to be discussing much wider, bigger picture issues. Philip said the following in response. He said, my knowledge of the Round Table talks comes from having attended them regularly for 3 years and speaking to various members of COBDO, the Council of British Druid Orders, and English Heritage, who then attended them prior to my involvement even. The British Druid Order joined the English Heritage Round Table talks in 1996. I don't know exactly when they started, though I believe Rollo Morfling, the ancient Druid Order, Tim Sebastian, and Philip Cargom set up the Council of British Druid Orders in 1989, having met at Stonehenge 2 or 3 years earlier. Since the original impetus behind the Council of British Druid Orders was mainly based around securing ritual access to Stonehenge, they would have contacted English Heritage very shortly after that to set up meetings. So my guess would be that the Round Table meetings involving them began about circa 1990. From hazy recollections of conversations with the above-mentioned people, I'd say that's about right. The British Druid Order joined COBDO in 1991, at which point Rollo Morfling was, I believe, already at Stonehenge officer, and presumably engaged in talks with English heritage. And he also says, which is quite interesting, that if you're seriously interested in research in all this, which I am as a historian, and I'd like to clarify, that maybe the minutes of Cobdo should be looked at in detail for this. But we also have Rollo Morthling here, who in your head, of course, carry all the information too. Now, the only other apology really is indirect from English Heritage themselves. Nobody here from English Heritage? Hands up. Now, I am very disappointed, I have to say, because I did give them a lot of notice, and Cluse Everard, who was the manager of Stonehenge, always used to come to these meetings. The current manager, I believe it's someone called Kate Davis, seems to be a bit more remote, and I've seen some correspondence that she's quite difficult to gain access to, and I don't know why she hasn't come.
Busy.
She runs the whole WHS, it's not just Stonehenge.
She runs the whole Western region.
Jobs now.
So Cluse was replaced by her and...
There's 3 of them now that run separate parts.
Oh dear.
Kate does the whole WHS.
Is Hugo still there?
Okay.
Yeah. The person who should be coming is a lady called Laura Houghton, who was appointed solstice manager after the young solstice manager that replaced Peter Carson left.
Right.
But she's now had her job transcription, as you were saying, changed up to operational manner.
Laura Houghton.
Manager, Laura Houghton, yes. So, I mean, so
I've had correspondence
with getting any response from them.
Well, I mean, we just have to keep going, but I mean, I did have a detailed reply from someone who styled himself head of personal security to the head of English Heritage, which I thought was rather
Duncan?
strange.
Or Brian Cleary, does help.
No, I can't remember the name.
It would be Duncan.
It will be Nick or Duncan.
The reason you've had that is because Lisa, who was running the planning for the operation, left halfway through the job, and it has then to be picked up by people who know it best after her, and that was Nick or Duncan, who historically looked after the security element of the site.
Right. Okay, well, I will keep breathing away to make sure the right people listen, and at the right level of
Was the National Trust involved?
authority. The National Trust also were invited, and again, they should be here. But anyway, they will receive a transcript of the film, and they're here in absentia, and so are the great British public. Okay. So look, I'd like to welcome everybody. Now we've done the introductions, and focus minds on the agenda, which you should all have a copy of within sight of where you're sitting. If you don't, can you put your hand up, please? If you don't have, could you pass this to the back table there? Anyone else not have some kind of agenda in front of them? Could you pass that to Nicola? Could you pass that round to Nicola? And then the person, Darren, behind Nicola. Nicola's doing the filming, bless her. I'm going to Saint Nicola. Right. Okay, so the first... right. Can I ask a volunteer to take the minutes, if that's possible, in shorthand? Is anyone handy with a pen? We do. George isn't here. You always used to do the minutes. So, anyone like doing minutes? Hands up. Yes. Come on, Lois. I'm sure that sigh wasn't a donation of time. No, there you go.
I've got my own pad.
Only the minutes are important. Thank you so much. Right. No, we just need a written version for those that can't.
I'll do some, but I can't do it.
No, Lois kindly volunteered. She's brilliant at it. Okay, so the first thing, which is incredibly important, is the bigger picture question, or long-term question of access. Now, this is something that's come up, and it's from the perspective of the TRC, as I say, when the visitor centre was first mooted, the point that everybody used to make again and again was that's fine for tourists if they want to pay 15 quid and park up and look around the posh museum. But what about the average spiritual pilgrim who may have come from the States or may have come from the Amazon jungle? We have all kinds of interesting people interested in Stonehenge. They don't want to do the tourist trail. They want to do the spiritual, access. And I think what I got from people's introductions going around the room is I think there's a general consensus in this room that they're not really being catered to. And it's certainly not made clear. I mean, I didn't see any signs welcoming, you know, sort of shamans and druids and Wiccans and spiritual pilgrims. What I got from the museum, I carefully went round it yesterday, listening to all the audio guide and all that, was a sort of the general thing that it's presenting is quite a secularized thing. You know, some crazy people think the Druids have got something to do with this, but of course they don't, was the general message. Hands up who's been actually round the new visitor centre and done the tour guide thing. Would you agree with me that that's the kind of general message it gives?
Yeah, it's ridiculing the spiritual aspect of Stonehenge.
Right, it's a sort of ridiculing type thing.
Yeah, nothing to do with that, with thousands, 10,000 years before Druids anyway.
Okay, right. Yeah, what would you say?
Can I speak on a spiritual level?
Yeah.
From me coming to doing my vision quest, and I explained it to you yesterday.
Yeah.
Usually Native Americans aren't told to do vision quests off their homeland, but because I'm other ethnicities as well, when it was called to me, I questioned it a lot, and then I ended up coming anyway. The tough part for me was, in doing a vision quest at Stonehenge, was the tourists. Not to say that they can't go, because absolutely, from an archaeological standpoint, it is a beautiful monument and should be appreciated by all.
Yeah.
But for me, doing a vision quest and having people walk by, screaming, yelling, my husband having to deter people from taking photos of me while I'm doing it, was a little bit tough. But again, for me coming into your country, because this is not my country, coming into your country, I need to be respectful of that. Do you understand?
Sure.
Of people taking photos and of people being curious as to what I'm doing. So I'm kind of caught in the middle of understanding absolutely where you come from and absolutely what you want. But again, I don't know, it's kind of a, how would you approach somebody? I mean, how would you allow somebody like me, and I say like me being Native American and doing a vision quest, how would you allow somebody like me to actually do that at Stonehenge? How would that happen?
That's a good question.
Yesterday we were sat behind you while you were smudging.
Uh-huh.
We didn't interfere with you.
No,
We
no,
took
no.
Photographs of you. You were just allowed to carry on and do your thing. And that's how it should be for everyone.
Yeah, at the visitor center. I'm speaking when I was on the Stonehenge grounds. There
Should be
were.
the same, should be the same respect.
Yeah.
Yes, Robert, do you want to answer that? About access. Can we talk one at a time, Darren, if you want?
It's £110 on a sunrise and a sunset. Yeah.
Right. Can we talk one at a time? Is that possible?
So he just informed me that if you're of wealthy means, that you can pay for private access, but if you're not of wealthy means,
well, that's okay. That we're discussing access here and the politics. That is a fact. If you're wealthy, you can buy a time slot after the tourists have gone home, like early evening.
And dawn.
And
By
dawn.
dawn as well.
Yeah. Which, you know, I'm not sure how, because a lot of pagans don't have a lot of money, so I'm not quite sure about that. Doesn't seem fair. Roland?
Yeah. Well, what you just said about the visit centre, which I haven't seen yet, but that notion about the Druids having nothing to do with it, this was something in which two archaeologists only pledged their whole lives and careers and reputations just after the war. One was Jaquetta Hawkes, and the other was Professor Glyn Daniel, editor of magazine Antiquity. Now, since then, Professor Lord Renfrew, who's the guy who pioneered carbon dating, which is universal around the world and all the rest of it, stated that as far as he was concerned, he was one-time chairman of English Heritage, but in fact, the people who worship the sun coming over the Hillstone ever since Stonehenge was built, and perhaps before then, that's what, going back into thousands of years previously, were proto-Druids of some sort, if that's just the only name we have for people that come and celebrate at Stonehenge. But of course, since then, by the sound of what you're saying, this has now been pushed back again into, oh no, Druids don't really have anything to do with it.
It's just, I think it's a misunderstanding about terminology, actually, because the people that deny the link between Druidry and Stonehenge are using the term in a very specific and narrow way, whereas Druids themselves tend to use the word to mean the spiritual seers, shamans of the ancestors of these islands. And that goes right back in time. I personally, you know...
The narrow-minded guy who says the Druids had nothing to do with it and all that. Great, you know, no, you give me a fool, you gave everyone else a fool, but not me. Great, okay, we're very inclusive.
I think
you're really seriously on the path of truth and reconciliation, aren't you, Chairman?
Right, I think that, I hope I am, and I believe I've offered you all the forms, same as everybody else.
Well, they went onto the table, I think.
Do you have one now? I mean, you have an agenda.
Get one, yeah. No thanks to you.
Well,
I'm not narrow-minded to feed the Druids. Lots of people know the Druids.
So I wasn't making a personal attack on you. I was trying to respond as I see it, as a historian, and my first passion in life.
Knows, you know what I mean? So don't be like grand sweeping statements from you about this and that. You know
I think, with all due respect, you know, I believe somewhat differently to you, and that's fine. Let's just leave it at that.
I think this is basically revolving around simple facts that we know about. And when we get to an area in the past where we don't know about facts, we've made what I see as a reasonable assumption. And to put that more clearly, the Romans called the teachers and the healers in this country Druids. So most people, because we haven't got any history prior to the Romans that we can actually access properly, most people assume and are happy to label any of those people that were holding that type of position as Druids or proto-Druids, because we didn't factually know what they were calling. The Romans called these people Druids. Now, we don't know what those people were called 1,500 years before the Romans turned up.
Well, we don't know what language they were speaking. All kinds of assumptions.
What I'm saying is, although there's no proof, it's quite reasonable to label them in the same way that the Romans did, because they didn't really know what they were doing either.
So I would agree with you. And it's not just the Roman sources, it's also the ancient Irish sources and the medieval sources.
And also the Greek.
It goes back a very long way. So
there is an argument that the Druids invented themselves in Victorian times, with the ones in the white sheets. They've got no historical link. They're saying they invented the Druids in Victorian times.
Yeah, I know Ron Hutton sort of kind of argues that.
The people who hang out at Stonehenge and wave the arms around, the Druid, you can define it like that, in which case...
Well,
I'm not a Druid. I'm not a Druid.
Okay, so there's a huge debate there.
It's a philosophy.
But